迄今为止，中国核电站保持着良好的运行记录，未发生影响环境和公众健康的事件。
Ah, yes, we should rest easy. China is known for its immaculate record of safety with regards to dealing with safeguarding the public from potentially far-reaching hazardous and dangerous factories, plants, and operations. China is hungry for power. Doesn't matter how dirty or unstable, as long as the bright lights of the big cities shine brightly, the human cost and cost to the environment is of secondary importance. Let's talk about this nuclear power station leak in southern China and why the Chinese government is downplaying its importance. China has a history of bad safety. Only last week, a massive gas explosion in the city of Shiyan in Hubei province killed at least 25 people and injured over 100 more. The devastation could have been prevented had safety regulations been observed. Strangely, on the same weekend, 8 people died due to a chemical leak of methyl formate whilst chemicals were being offloaded from a truck at a chemical factory over 650 miles away in Guiyang City, Guizhou province. Again, failure to adhere to proper safety standards and procedures. It doesn't end there. Apparently, 6 maintenance workers died after falling into a sewage water tank, again on the same weekend, this time in Chengdu, 1,000 kilometers to the west of Hubei. This is a small sampling over a single weekend of accidents born of China's relaxed attitudes towards safety and inability to enforce safety regulations. It doesn't take much of a stretch of the imagination to see how these low standards could extend to China's new foray into nuclear power. Rushed construction and a devil-may-care growth above all attitude has contributed to many tragedies, including bridges collapsing, high-speed train disasters, massive explosions, and more. All in recent history and all heavily covered up by the Chinese government. A bit of background. I lived for 14 years in the same province and area that this nuclear power station is situated, the one that's leaking right now. I remember when it was commissioned, the lead up and issues that it faced. I also know people who worked at another nuclear power station in the area, the Daya 1 nuclear power plant. Now this plant is only 100 odd miles away from the Taishan nuclear power plant, the one that's leaking. Here you can see the Daya 1 plant. I'd often ride past it on my motorcycle adventures in Huizhou. And something interesting to note about this particular plant, it too suffered a leak and subsequent cover-up. Initially, a whistleblower uncovered that there was a leak in one of the fuel tubes and that radioactive iodine had been released. Of course, officials vehemently denied that anything had happened. However, China Light and Power, one of the shareholders in the plant, later released a statement saying that the leak was small and nothing to worry about, confirming that there was indeed an incident. This was back in 2010. Now that we have an idea on how China deals with these industrial mishaps, let's move on to the topic at hand. The leak at China's Taishan Nuclear Power Plant. The Taishan plant is special. It is the first and only currently active set of EPR nuclear reactors. This stands for European Pressurized Reactor, or Evolutionary Power Reactor. It is of French and German design. It's a third-generation pressurized water reactor. There really are no others like it. In fact, construction was started on 2 other EPR nuclear reactors in Finland and France respectively, but construction has constantly been delayed, in part because of issues discovered whilst commissioning the Taishan reactor. In other words, there are no other reactors to compare these current issues to. And what exactly is happening within the confines of the Taishan reactor? Well, this reactor has been plagued with issues from the start, such as a cracked boiler and other things which were taken care of in the beginning during construction. In April of this year, an unexpected venting of radioactive gas into the atmosphere happened, and the entire Taishan Unit 1 suffered an emergency shutdown in February of this year. This was due to a technician shorting things out when replacing a faulty voltmeter. These kind of issues are to be expected when implementing new technology, but what is worrying is that no one would have known or would have been alerted to the current issue if it wasn't for the French partners and stakeholders of the plant raising the alarm by seeking technical advice from the USA. In other words, no one would have been the wiser to an issue existing within the reactor if it had been left up to China's National Nuclear Safety Administration. So, what is this all about? And does it pose a threat to the Chinese public? Well, from what we know, the nuclear reactor is leaking fission gas and has seen a buildup of noble gases and increased radiation caused by potentially the degradation of the housing of the fuel rods. We know this because the French designer and 30% stakeholder of the Taishan reactor, Framatome, reached out and sent a memo to the United States, in which it said, and I quote, "The situation is an imminent radiological threat to the site and to the public, and Framatome urgently requests permission to transfer technical data and assistance as may be necessary to return the plant to normal operation." The memo also indicates that the amount of radioactive gas that is being released already exceeds French safety standards, and that the Chinese government keeps moving the goalposts, increasing the limits on the amount of gas that can be safely released from the facility without shutting it down. They also continue to raise the off-site dose limits. In other words, in order to keep this reactor running, the Chinese government keeps changing the rules, keeps upping the limit that's considered safe. After speaking to some friends of mine who are very knowledgeable on the topic, they assure me that there still isn't any real threat to the local populace. But remember, I have a personal stake in this. Not only do I care about the people of China, but my best friend lives only 30 miles away from the reactor. My Chinese in-laws live in the same province as well as most of my extended Chinese family. Whilst the data is still fairly vague and the popular consensus seems that this will not result in a disaster, this is a clear demonstration of how China's opaque way of dealing with things, especially internal failures, are to the detriment of the local Chinese people and the entire world. Only now, after this memo leaked to CNN and subsequently the world, was China backed into a corner and forced to release a statement. Now, when it comes to massively important safety issues surrounding nuclear energy, timeliness and transparency are of utmost importance. China's NNSA took far longer than 24 hours to release a statement in a time where speculation following the initial announcement of the issue was running wild. In typical communist fashion, deflection and justification was all that resulted. China's NNSA admitted that fuel rod cladding was indeed damaged and the cause of the gas leakage, but said that only a small percentage of the 60,000 fuel rods were damaged. Totally okay and nothing to fret about. Damaged fuel rods in a nuclear reactor? Totally safe, not newsworthy. Also, with regards to them moving the goalposts, they denied this, saying that they didn't change the acceptable limit. Here, let me read what they said, and I quote, "The NNSA did not approve an increase in the acceptable limit of radiation detection outside Taishan NPP. The NNSA reviewed and approved the relevant limits for the specific activity of the reactor coolant inert gas in the primary circuit. This was a revision to the technical specifications for chemistry and radiochemistry in Taishan NPP." Now, I don't know if the Chinese NNSA is aware, but revision and change are the same thing. You can't worm your way out of this one. That's like me saying, oh, I didn't change my mind about ordering pizza tonight. I revised my dinner plans and they now no longer include pizza. Morons. Remember, COVID spread worldwide due to the exact same nothing to see here, don't let anyone know method of dealing with a crisis. China needs to be held accountable. And just like the Chinese government tried to pull the wool over our eyes at the start of the pandemic, they will continue to do so on every level. Never trust what the Chinese government tells us, as censorship is something that they excel at above all else. I'm sure we will all be keeping a very close eye on this situation. Let's hope that China doesn't suffer its own Chernobyl. Unlike the CCP, stay awesome.